Chapter 10, Aggregate Supply and Demand. Now, when we're talking about the aggregate, we're talking about the economy as a whole, not for individual goods or services. We spent the first half of the class talking about price theory as it relates to individuals. Now we're going to focus on the economy as a whole. Individually, we presume that only one variable will change, ceteris paribus, and for the aggregate, we cannot presume the entire economy will behave itself along the entirety of the curve. That being said, there are some constants outlined on page 304 that we do presume. We presume there will be consumption. Now, this relates to the buying power of the dollar, and we discussed this earlier in terms of inflation. We presume that there is going to be investment happening. Monetary policy, which is interest rates, determine how businesses invest, whether they take out loans, and as the cost of money rises or falls, the planned investments will vary. We will rely on government purchases. Page 307 has a good explanation of how increasing prices can have a crowding out effect on other expenditures. I'll talk about crowding out in a little bit. And we know there are going to be exports. When working in a global economy, we cannot make the mistake of presuming the entire world will ceteris paribus while we figure out what we're doing. Interest rates, exchange rates, monetary policy on the international stage, they all confound the aggregate demand curve. Now, there are also factors to shifting the ADC. Consumer expectations. When consumer confidence is the best way to describe this. We've been going through some dramatic economic downturns, back in 2008 and now with the coronavirus. These downturns have not been seen in the better part of a century. Government policy. Again, your book has a good explanation of what types of policy Uncle Sam and his nephews might alter. For example, what changes will President Biden make to President Trump's economic policies? Think tariffs, think climate change, think immigration and travel bans. The global economy. International changes, both war, peace, politics, can all influence the ADC both negatively and positively. Instead of the aggregate demand curve, the aggregate supply curve shows the relationship between output and prices. Pages 313 through 315 has kind of a goodish explanation of what this is all about, so please go slowly. When we're talking about short run versus long run in the aggregate, it's conceptually a little tricky, so again, take it slowly. In the long run, your book says that there is potential for nothing to change, and that the ASC, the supply curve, will be a vertical line as you see on the right. And with this, I kind of respectfully disagree with Dolan and Klein. If this were truly the case, if nothing changed, there wouldn't be any innovation. We wouldn't be taking computer-based classes because there would be no computers. The short run ASC is where changes to cost and the absorption time is reflected. The absorption time is where the economy needs to fully account for the changes. So things are not going to be immediate. It takes the economy in the aggregate about 3 to 6 months to react. This is not to say that if there's huge news that the stock market isn't going to jump around. But that is not an aggregate long-term economy. That is the stock market has more kind of a herd mentality. If you've ever seen a murmuration of starlings in the fall, all of those flocks of birds that kind of keep flying in the same direction, that's pretty much what the stock market does. The short run aggregate supply curve, short run is roughly 3 to 6 months. The ADC and the ASC can play nicely together, but the charts in your book suck. They start to look like the football analysts writing on the smart tablet. It's gonna make sense if you take it slowly. Unlike the charts that we're used to, where you have 2 lines, maybe 3 curves, these charts have several differences that you're going to need to take into account, and these differences are on page 320. You look at the aggregate supply curve, the ASC, short term is angled, long term is vertical at 2000, and there are also two ADCs, AD0 and AD1. This shows the initial movement that is described in the narrative. And as you keep reading in the book, the narrative continues. They add curves, they pile up, the chart gets cluttered, and the John Madden-like gray arrows don't really help much any either. Take it slowly and ask questions in the forum.